Hi, everyone. Today we're going to be wrapping up the final section of our book, looking at the latter part of the last chapter, looking at collective behavior and social movements. So, just to remind ourselves, we can distinguish collective behavior in social movements by basically looking at the organization aspects and the timeliness aspects. So, in terms of time, the collective behavior is basically spontaneous in nature. I know there's not a lot of kind of time put into the actual behavior. It's very spontaneous. That lends itself to being unplanned, unorganized. Where in terms of the social movement, there is time and consideration put into it. There are plans being made. There is organization within the movement itself. So that's how we can distinguish the two. But we can also recognize that they can be separate. Often they are, but they can be connected at the same time. A collective behavior could lead to a social movement, or perhaps a social movement can be used as a justification for collective behavior. So today we'll be looking at basically the culture of social movements and also different framing devices within them. Framing basically is how you kind of organize meanings to motivate people to act within the social movement, to get people outside the social movement to kind of understand who you are and what you're doing. And so, framing devices, again, are kind of using these meanings that we've been talking about since the very beginning of the semester to motivate this collective action of the social movement itself. So, overall, you kind of frame the meaning in terms of the principles of your organization and also how people are thinking within the organization. So basically, you kind of have your principles, your mission statement, and you want to have kind of a compatible subjective understandings within your movement. So people are kind of thinking in the ways that reflect the principles, and the principles reflect the way people think within the organization. So you can link your ideology, kind of that collective thought that we talked about before, of the social movement to personal evaluations outside of it as well. So basically, kind of showing people, this is who we are, this is what we're about, and then getting people to kind of see you in such ways. So again, kind of framing devices, just in terms of how you would maybe take a picture or how you would dress, and basically kind of a front you're putting on to get people to see and understand things both inside and outside the organization in certain ways. And so again, often there's a lot of planning going on. There's a lot of organization that goes into creating frames within social movements for the people in the movement itself or for people outside of movement. So basically, you can talk about frame alignment. It's where kind of in the eyes of other people, you're framing who you are and what you do in terms of you're talking the talk and you're walking your walk in relation to the movement. So, people could say that, well, on the one hand, you state you're for this, but on the other hand, your behavior is contradicting what you say you're organized for. So you want to kind of align those understandings of you. So when people are looking at you and they're judging you, they'll say that yes, how they're acting, what they're saying is in line with their overall mission. There's no contradiction. The two go hand in hand. And then you can look at collective action frames. And here, basically, using meaning specific, the meanings that you use to kind of motivate yourself to kind of justify what you're doing. And this ties into a lot of what we'll talk about with the culture, looking at inequalities, looking at injustices, looking at kind of what really drives the social movement as a whole and kind of using those meanings to kind of justify why you are talking in certain ways, why you are kind of acting in other ways. So finally, frame bridging is basically when you start to bridge the gap between kind of you're saying one thing, but perhaps you're doing something else. So here's where you want to align kind of what you're saying, the talking that you're doing, with the walking that you're doing, so the two come together. So if the frame is kind of not aligned properly, you need to align it. by kind of bridging the gap here and by having the actions match the talking and the talking match the actions. And when you bridge this, it kind of aligns that frame. So, in the eyes of other people, you are talking the talk and you are walking the walk when it comes to your overall mission of your social movement. So, looking at the culture of social movements, we can identify different types of symbols that are to use to basically represent who you are and what you're about, to represent who you are and the goals of your social movement. And the book specifically talks about logos, martyrs, uh, places, and we can basically say that symbolically, social movements begin to associate themselves with a person, a place, or a thing, whether it be a flag, whether it be uh, a location in which kind of the movement started, or a person overall. So if you look of 7 years ago with the hashtag Black Lives Matters, Tavon Martin's become kind of a martyr, a person kind of used to represent the Black Lives Matters movement. And so you can associate your movement with a person, and this kind of ties into what we'll talk about with narratives in a second. Or again, a certain place, typically a place where the movement started. Sometimes it starts with that collective behavior at a certain location, a very spontaneous activity, but then it formalizes later on into a social movement. And you kind of use that place, where the collective behavior started, as a symbol of the later movement that emerged. And then again, things you can look at, it's basically different imagery, whether it be kind of a flag, um, or sometimes it's different kind of logos in terms of this is who we are, represent that. It's not necessarily a flag, but it kind of operates in the same function to symbolically kind of represent who you are. So just thinking about, again, Black Lives Matters, sometimes you see kind of the closed fist associated with that movement, and that closed fist kind of ties into earlier kind of movements collected to racial injustices. So narratives often are kind of tied into these different symbolic associations that we connect with social movements. So overall, we can say the narratives are basically stories in one form or another. The narrative is a story that's connected to the movement, the past, how it started, how far it's come, the present, kind of who we are now, what we represent. And often, again, you kind of intertwine the logos, the martyrs, and the places, and they're part of the narrative, they're part of the stories. Sometimes, kind of the main figures in the narratives kind of go back to the more kind of symbolic culture of the movement, whether it been the person who, sacrificed uh, her or his life, the person who experienced struggles, or the person who kind of is a success symbol. So kind of going back to Black Lives Matters, Barack Obama typically is kind of held up, as somebody who is an excess, of what's possible, but also the movement kind of focuses on the struggles along the way and the injustices kind of within those struggles. So overall, that's what we're kind of looking at in terms of the social movement, how it basically presents itself through different frames. This is who we are. This is what we're about. And then with the movement part, it's not only kind of talking the talk with your mission, but showing action, doing the movement that aligns with your mission. When there's kind of a mismatch between kind of what you're saying and what you're doing, you need to kind of bridge that gap and align your frames properly. So in the eyes of other people, in the eyes of your own members, you are kind of walking the walk, you are talking the talk. And then there's kind of a culture within every social movement. It can be, again, kind of Black Lives Matters, white nationalist movements, any social movement is going to have its own kind of unique culture. But one similarity among social movements is that that culture will be comprised of different narratives that are used to kind of tell the tale of the social movement. The narratives focus on the injustices, the struggles, and the successes. and also the culture, although unique, will have similarities with other social movement cultures by having certain logos, having certain people representing the group, and also connecting the group itself, the movement, to certain places. So we'll leave that there for today. For paper 5, I specifically kind of ask you to get into this a little bit further. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what you guys come up with in terms of the social movement and kind of the culture of the movement. So I'll leave that there for today. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know. And when we get back together for our next class, we'll be getting into some specific articles that I'll be discussing, and I'll be linking these articles back to our book. So although we're kind of finishing up the book for the semester, I'll be referring to key ideas from the book and how they relate to the articles we'll be talking about over the next couple of weeks.